Droves of masked men gather. Cars and bins are set alight. Thick smoke fills the air. The mob moves through residential streets, smashing windows and kicking in doors, targeting homes believed to belong to migrants. A Turkish barbershop and an Arab-owned business are attacked. Makeshift checkpoints appear as men stop cars and scrutinize drivers' ethnicity. These are scenes from Belfast, Northern Ireland. The violence followed a brutal stabbing in which a white man was critically injured after being attacked in the eye, neck, and back. The suspect was quickly identified as a Sudanese national who had entered the UK through legal routes. Footage of the attack spread rapidly online. Within hours, public figures such as Nigel Farage, Rupert Lau, Katie Hopkins, and Richard Dawkins were presenting the assault as evidence of a wider threat posed by migrants. The attack was framed as an attempted beheading, transforming an individual act of violence into a racial story about a nation under siege. Far-right activist Tommy Robinson urged his supporters to take to the streets. Elon Musk's platform, X, helped amplify the message to millions. But it would be a mistake to explain what happened simply by pointing to Robinson. Social media algorithms were a handful of far-right agitators. All played a role, yet focusing on them alone obscures a more uncomfortable truth. Nor should the violence be whitewashed as anti-immigration protests or reduced to vague notions of community tensions. Such language conceals both the racial character of the attacks and the mainstream anti-Muslim and anti-migrant racism that made them possible in the first place. The more important questions are these. How did these men come to see themselves as defenders of the nation? And why do appeals to racial vigilantism increasingly resonate within British political culture? The attacks in Belfast were not merely the product of fringe extremists exploiting a tragedy. They emerged from a broader context of racism that has for years racialized migrants, and particularly Muslims, as existential threats. Through this process, many white citizens have come to imagine themselves as members of a besieged community with a duty to defend the white nation against internal enemies. More significantly, Belfast reveals a dangerous racial dynamic whereby actors within the mainstream invoke, legitimize, or tacitly encourage forms of vigilante politics while maintaining plausible deniability for the consequences. Far-right actors are not simply born, they are made. Their worldview is cultivated through racial discourses that circulate widely throughout society, from fringe online networks and alternative media ecosystems to newspaper columns, television debates, and government policy. For more than a decade, anti-Muslim and anti-migrant racism has extended far beyond the organized far-right. Politicians and newspapers have racialized asylum seekers as criminals, terrorists, welfare scroungers, and opportunists exploiting Britain's generosity. Migration has been framed not as a humanitarian challenge, but as a national security issue requiring extraordinary measures. These narratives rarely call for violence directly. They do something subtler. They encourage citizens to see themselves as participants in a national struggle against a dangerous and illegitimate presence. The result is the creation of a constituency primed to believe that the survival of the nation is at stake. Once people have come to see themselves as defenders of a threatened white nation, a second move becomes possible: the mobilization of ordinary people to confront the perceived racial threat themselves. Here, the white vigilante becomes politically useful. He can pursue forms of racial intimidation and violence that mainstream politicians cannot openly endorse, while allowing those same politicians to deny responsibility for the consequences. We saw this dynamic during the controversy surrounding the pro-Palestine marches following the outbreak of the conflict in Gaza in late 2003. Former Home Secretary Suella Braverman warned of Islamist terror on British streets and urged Britain to stand up and take on the mobs. More recently, a similar summon to violence was visible in Farage's call for the British public to show pure cold rage after the killing of Henry Novak. Such interventions matter, not just because they openly advocate racial violence, but because they summon a street force prepared to act outside of conventional democratic processes. This political logic is not unique to Britain. It can be seen in US President Donald Trump's mobilization of forces after his election loss in 2020, which culminated in the January 6th Capitol insurrection. It can be seen in the Modi government's promotion of love jihad narratives that have fueled mob violence against Muslims in India. It can be seen in settler violence in the occupied West Bank, often enabled or legitimized by actors within the Israeli political mainstream. And historically, it was seen in the intimate relationship between the Ku Klux Klan and local authorities across the American South. In each case, extra state actors enact forms of racial policing that political elites cannot always openly authorized, but nevertheless find politically useful. Belfast should therefore not be understood simply as a breakdown of UK's political order. In important respects, it was an expression of it. For years, UK political culture has encouraged people to see migrants as invaders, asylum seekers as threats, and Muslims as a problem to be managed. And when public figures repeatedly tell citizens that the nation is under siege, some will inevitably conclude that defending it is their responsibility. The question is not whether fringe extremists exploited a tragedy. It is why so many people have been taught to see racial violence as a form of national defense.